This is On Track, talkSPORT's motorsport show, available premiering on Tuesday afternoons at 2 p.m. on talkSPORT 2, then replayed throughout the week, also on the talkSPORT podcast network and on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. I'm John Jackson. Lots to talk about today. It's going to be quite a reactive show because we have the FIA World Council happening over in Macau, where they look at all kinds of different things, but the main thing we're looking out for is the new calendars for Formula One and Formula E, and maybe World Endurance Championship and the World Rally Championship as well. But we're mainly focusing on Formula One and Formula E. We're also going to look ahead to the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend in Formula One. And of course, Le Mans happening, and I'll tell you which Le Mans superstar you can hear on talkSPORT this week in the build-up. Now, joining me this week is a man that's normally kind of like the Pied Piper of animals. He will bring all kinds of animals to the party wherever we record this show. He seems to be, just followed by any kind of rodents, felines, and aviary. What do you call birds, Nick?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't even a bird in Saudi. It was a bat. Is a bat a bird? Is that a bird?
No, it's not.
That's a good question, isn't it? Well, there you go. Good question.
A bat is completely different. Anyway, Nick Golding from Racing News 365. And as I say, we're kind of digesting this information as it comes in right now on Tuesday because, they're kind of releasing this information very, very slowly from over in Macau. But what we do know so far then is the Formula One calendar for next year. And there's no real big surprises, is there? I think the one that everyone's looking out for is the street race, because everyone's intrigued to see what will happen in Madrid with the street race. And that is now penciled in then for September the 11th, 12th and 13th, that weekend. But other than what we've seen there, it's more about the moving things around, isn't it?
There's a few things which have caught my eye. You mentioned them, Madrid, and of course what's interesting with Madrid, and of course it still needs to be homologated by the FIA. That will take place later in the year. So actually that's still effectively kind of a TBC because it's not officially happening yet, but obviously the plans are for it to happen. But what's interesting with Madrid is it will also be hosting Formula 2 and actually the Formula 3 season finale instead of Monza, which is quite interesting. And you mentioned there as well that things moving about, and perhaps the biggest mover is Canada, which has come forward to the 24th of May. But crucially, that clashes with the Indy 500. Now, we always have the Monaco Indy 500 clash, but of course, when it comes to the timings, they don't overlap at all because, well, Monaco's in Europe and, well, Indianapolis isn't. Canada also, or should I say Montreal, isn't in the United States, but it is in the same time zone, which creates an interesting problem because it means there will be an overlap. So it'll be interesting to see which race gets the bigger fan base, the bigger viewers, because we know how big North America is for F1, but the Indy 500 is one of the biggest races in the world. The other thing which is interesting is it looks like there will be a clash between the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona and most likely the Le Mans at 24 hours. The problem there is that obviously we've got Le Mans clashing with Canada this weekend, but again, very different time zones. So it's not a huge clash. Should it be as expected that Le Mans and Barcelona do clash, then well, that's actually the exact same time zone on the exact same weekend, meaning both races will finish at the same time. So for me, the biggest surprise is some of the movers, but obviously, Formula 3 season finale in Madrid. What can go wrong?
I think that'll be good. I think obviously when they're bringing in a new street track, they want to go big on it, and that's why they brought kind of the whole party to the Spanish capital. I think when you say about these sort of clashes, I think we're very lucky in the United Kingdom, aren't we, that we get to watch racing at kind of not too terrible times. I was recently in the Far East and trying to catch stuff there is a little bit tricky. Sometimes it works out that it's in the morning, but sometimes it's properly in the middle of the night in the early hours. So, when we'd have that May bank holiday, you would have the Monaco Grand Prix, and then you could, whether you're there or watching on TV, you have a bit of a break, then you can, go and watch the Indy 500, and it kind of worked nicely. I don't know what, I guess the first thing to say about this is it's quite unavoidable sometimes, isn't it? Because there's always going to be clashes. There's so much motorsport going on, even just in the United Kingdom, trying to get British GT on different weekends from touring cars and things like that. That's really tricky. Then imagine you're doing a 24-date championship like Formula One and you're trying to avoid World Endurance Championship, which doesn't affect it as much. But we obviously talk a lot about the clash between World Endurance Championship and Formula E, where drivers kind of do dual programs. And, I know that we've got Berlin coming up, which is going to throw up a few problems for a couple of teams. And we'll get on to one of the drivers that's been announced for one of those teams that's got a clash a little bit later. But when you're trying to fit all these things into a motorsports calendar, and when these calendars are expanding, it's getting busier and busier and busier. I think having the Indy 500 in a very similar time zone to the Canadian Grand Prix, though. I think that's the big one, isn't it? Because, I mean, the Canadian Grand Prix aren't going to be so happy with that, because the Indy 500 is kind of your Daytona 500 in NASCAR. It's your, Monaco Grand Prix in the United Kingdom. It's your Super Bowl. So are they going to be worried that people in North America and worldwide aren't going to be watching as much?
I think it's a big surprise because actually, speaking personally, the Canadian Grand Prix is one of, if not my favourite F1 race on the year, because it always throws up a surprise, whether that be in good racing, whether that be in the weather. But of course, as a motorsport fan, I also enjoy to watch the Indy 500. Now, normally that's not been a problem because obviously, as I mentioned, Monaco and Indy happen at very different times of the day. Canada, the Canadian Grand Prix and Indy 500 is going to be literally a direct clash unless they move one of the two timings, which then obviously causes problems for the broadcasters, for fans entering the venue, getting to the venue. So I think it's very disappointing. And actually, I had a really good conversation with former F1 driver, current Red Bull simulator driver, Sebastian Buemi, who's also a 4-time WEC champion, former FE champion, 4-time Le Mans champion. And he was saying that actually, the Le Mans 24 Hours in particular is one event which should just be standalone on its own weekend because it's so significant. It doesn't need these clashes, because what these clashes also do is we've seen now and again that F1 drivers like to have a little go in maybe Le Mans or the Indy 500, thinking of Fernando Alonso, of course, Nico Hülkenberg recently at Le Mans, going back a few years. That's impossible, and we don't see that. And of course, the one driver we want to see give Le Mans a go is Max Verstappen. Well, based on the current calendar and how heavy F1 is in particular, it's just not possible until he quits F1. So it's kind of, you want to see these massive events on their own weekend, so it opens these doors to drivers swapping championships for a one-off weekend, because I think as well, the fans want to see that, the broadcasters would love that. And I mean, it would give you a lot to talk about at talkSPORT.
Of course. A slight sort of sidestep then. You mentioned Max Verstappen. I was talking about this with a friend yesterday. What do you think needs to happen for him to drive in Le Mans? Do you think a move to Aston Martin is the most obvious way of him maybe doing Le Mans while he's still an F1 driver?
I don't think so. I think it's interesting because if you look at his GT racing team, and of course the tests that he's done recently at the Nordschleife, he's using a Ferrari GT3 car. So there's obviously some kind of deal in place between obviously his racing team and Ferrari, but of course Aston Martin and obviously Adrian Newey in particular, you'd imagine that that's something which would be very attractive for him. We're coming to a really interesting time, because if you're Max Verstappen, do you look to move for next season, not knowing, should I say at the moment, who's going to be wearing the pecking order because of these new regulations? Or do you give it a season, stick with Red Bull for 2026, kind of accept it will be what it will be, given Red Bull now going to be supplying their own powertrain for next year? So a very, very different project. And then maybe look to go to the best team in 2027. Of course, if that is Aston Martin, then maybe, yes, that opens the door down the line to Le Mans, to doing WEC, to doing maybe IMSA or something, which is actually something, in all fairness, I could see Alonso doing down the line, sticking with Aston Martin, giving Le Mans another crack. So for now, no, I can't see Max going anywhere other than Red Bull. In the future, I think it very much depends on, Aston Martin can have all the money in the world, but if they're not competitive, I don't think Max will want that. And again, something Sebastian Buemi mentioned is that Max is just passionate. He just wants to be racing in the best races in the world, in the best cars, fighting for victories. I don't think he's the kind of driver who's going to want to be in the midfield, helping a team towards the back get to the front. I don't think that's him. He's a born winner. So Aston Martin maybe, but I don't think at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? We've talked a lot about Lewis Hamilton making moves at the right time, and I think maybe this Ferrari move is a bit different to that. But, when he moved on and everyone was kind of absolutely shocked that he would potentially leave McLaren and go to Mercedes. Why would you do that? It worked out really well. And I think these drivers will have people, and obviously they'll have information being fed to them about how people are looking for next season. And I think when you have these big changes like we're having in 2026, it's obviously going to be such a big one there that it'll be fascinating to see which moves happen, if any. And as you say, it might be better to sit around for a year and wait. What do you make of Lance Stroll? Because it looks like, and this does have a sort of Le Mans link link to it with Felipe Drugovich. It looks very much like Felipe Drugovich is, preparing for Le Mans. I mean, you would prepare for Le Mans, you're driving at Le Mans, but he has also suggested that he would drop that if there was an opportunity to race in Canada this weekend. It looks like Lance Stroll is probably going to race. I know we haven't had confirmation, but all signs point to him being on the grid at home in Canada.
Yeah, it's looking like Lance is going to be okay. And in all fairness, if there was one race you would bet money on him entering, it would be his home race, because I mean, it's for him, and I imagine obviously his partners and his personal sponsors, and even for his father, of course, it's the one that he needs to race. And of course, Felipe Drugovich has been the Aston Martin reserve for a couple of years now, obviously former F2 champion, and is that one of those drivers who you feel has always deserved a chance in Formula One, yet has never actually been able to compete in a race. He's obviously done FP1 sessions, did a preseason test a couple of years ago when obviously Lance had his fall in Spain, obviously his cycling accident where obviously he damaged both his wrists. So he's kind of waiting for his chance. And we've seen this as well actually with Felipe in Formula E, because obviously he's been linked several times to maybe having a Formula E seat, but he's always kind of turned it down just in hope that F1 door will open, because that is ultimately what he wants, to the point that he, has said himself, as you pointed out, that he would drop Le Mans if the chance to race for Aston Martin in Canada were to open up. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Obviously, it's also worth remembering that Le Mans testing actually began last weekend on Sunday, the first test day. So over there, they're already very much focusing on the big race. So it looks unlikely. It looks like Felipe's going to have to wait for another day. I guess the big question is, will he ever get that chance? And I suppose, will that wait ever end?
Yeah, and obviously he wanted to be the next Brazilian driver on the grid after a long wait for a Brazilian. Then he's been sort of overtaken by Gabriel Bortoleto, who's come in and become the next Brazilian driver. So I imagine there's a very frustrated sort of element of Felipe Drugovich, but, still a great driver. And I would love to see him have his chance. I think that, that he's one of the drivers of the last, decade that is very deserving of his chance. Obviously, Théo Pourchaire is another driver that probably should have got his chance as well. And, we watched this space to see what he does next season, with rumours swirling that he might be in line for a Formula E drive. Right, let's look back at this calendar then, because we kind of took a bit of a sideways step to go off at a tangent, which we do quite a lot, let's be honest. It all starts in Australia, and for me, starting the season in Australia is the way it should start. It was, traditionally started there for ages, then it got taken over by the Middle East. Because of Ramadan again, it will be starting again in Australia. I kind of hope that it will go back to that full time, but I have a feeling there might be some deals in place with Bahrain for them to start the season there anyway. March the 6th to the 8th for Australia, and Albert Park in Melbourne is a kind of iconic track. It doesn't always throw up the best racing, but I think when you, especially being from the UK, when you start a new season, the whole kind of road trip, going back on the road all the way to Australia, because it is, probably the furthest destination you'll go to from the United Kingdom, it does feel like it's worthy of starting a season. It feels like it's something new. It has that gravitas to get you excited for the new season ahead.
It feels right, doesn't it? And actually, you mentioned that it doesn't always throw up good races. This year's was quite good. We also had the sudden rain shower. We had Isaac Hadjar, of course, not even starting the race because he crashed on the formation lap. What a superstar he's gone and turned out to be. But it feels right. And you mentioned there about the fans, and actually for those who obviously don't travel out to the race and watch it from home, particularly from the UK, I think even for those who work in the industry, that there's something exciting about waking up at 4, 5 in the morning or something. If you're, young, bringing down pretty much your entire bed with you to be comfy on the sofa with a hot drink on maybe some early breakfast or something, and watching everything unfold. It does feel right. It's a nice way to start the season because it's memorable as well. I think whether it's a good race or a bad race, you remember that alarm going off at 3:55 a.m. before the race gets underway, remembering how tired you were that day, and then criticising the race for being bad or praising the race for being good. But it feels right. And of course, you mentioned obviously that because of Ramadan, we don't actually head to the Middle East until Bahrain for the Bahrain Grand Prix, the 4th round on April the 12th. And then we have obviously Bahrain with Saudi Arabia. So the season starts again with Australia, China and Japan. So 3 very early races to start the season. I'm a fan of the calendar. I've got to. I think they've done a very, very good job.
I feel like we're getting a small insight into how you ingest Formula One and motorsport there, which I'll let people have their own mental image of that. I think for me, I always wanted to go to Albert Park. I was very lucky to have been able to go last year. And, street tracks are cool. I like going to a racetrack because you just have that kind of feeling of arriving there and enjoying what is on offer. But street tracks are cool. But I think for me, Albert Park is the ultimate street track because it's not in the city. It's not right in the center of the city. It's not on the streets that, it's not causing disruption. It is in a park, but it is on real roads. And I don't know if you've ever been there, you'll know that you can kind of get there in many different ways. You can get a taxi and there's no queues. It's not like Silverstone where it takes you, a massive amount of time to get in. It's the kind of place where you can stay in town and you can get, you can walk out there if you want to fancy a fairly long walk, or you can get like a hire bike or a hire scooter like I did. And you can kind of get there with no fuss. And you don't really, if you do it right, if you plan it, you don't really suffer the kind of crowds that you get at other F1 races, which take the edge off it slightly. So for me, a fantastic place to start the season. As you say, we had a pretty decent race there this time. And we then go on to China the week after. And then a couple of weeks after that is Japan. And this is kind of what Formula One is trying to do. It's a little bit of what Formula E tried to do by making logistics make a bit more sense. So you've kind of got the first three races are kind of like, Australasia in the Far East. Then you've got the Middle East. Then you have a kind of a bit of a US or North America escapade, and then you come back to Europe, which is one kind of big chunk is Europe before it kind of goes on to Azerbaijan, Singapore, and then back to the Americas, USA, Mexico, Brazil, back to the USA, and then it ends in the Middle East again. So everything's bunched together. There's no kind of mad journeys across the planet to then go back to pretty much where you were, which I think is a good thing, right?
I mean, it shows that having massive calendars and yet trying to keep emissions down is possible. And of course, that's a mission which Formula E are very proud of how good they do it. But of course, F1 now starting to group the races together more, which is the reason why, of course, Canada has been moved from being normally after the first European triple header to now after Miami and before Monaco. So that's the reason that's happening. But it makes sense, I think, as well for the teams. Obviously, logistically, it's easier to then plan where they've got to get their cargo to. And I think as well, in a silly way for fans, it makes adjusting to the time zones for each Grand Prix that much easier. Because I'll be honest, going into this weekend's Canadian Grand Prix, having just come out of 3 races in Europe, it's a bit of the races is now, we've had, 2 p.m. starts for the last 3. Oh, we've now got one at 7 p.m. So it's a bit of a jump. But obviously, there is, of course, one race not on the calendar. And you mentioned about races that you'd always wanted to go to. And for me, one that I always wanted to attend was Imola, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. I'm not going to go the full name because I can't remember all the sponsors, but it's the one, obviously, the only venue which isn't appearing on the 2026 calendar. And what's interesting is Imola actually released a statement following the release of the calendar, essentially saying that they were aware it was going to happen, but they're very keen for F1 to return back there in the future. And that's, for me, the history behind Imola. The things that happen, of course, in the past, obviously going back to the 2 fatal deaths and obviously some of the racing you get there as well. That's one venue for me I always wanted to attend. So hopefully that, for me, Imola returns in the future so I can go there one day. Is there anywhere else on Canada, John, that you look at and think I'd quite like a crack at that?
Well, I was going to say, obviously, the history of that. And I feel like every time Formula One goes back to Imola, it is a tribute to Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger. But obviously, there are other Grand Prix where tributes are paid. I think for me, I mean, the other big news isn't let's get on to Zandvoort. It's the last time that Formula One will be held at Zandvoort. And if you've ever been to Zandvoort, I mean, I've been there when Formula One's not on. And if you think it's kind of a weird, strange place on the coast with incredible winds when F1's there, trust me, when there's no F1 there and all the temporary stands aren't there and everything else is there, the wind absolutely whistles through there. I've been there in kind of sunny conditions and I've been there in torrential rain and horrific conditions. And it's a strange place. It's not my favourite track. I don't know that it would have ever happened if Max Verstappen wasn't in Formula One, and I think we can probably, say that it wouldn't have happened. But it feels like a shame that it's not going to be on the calendar after next year because, we see the kind of Max Verstappen fans going crazy with, it's there in Austria, isn't it, where you just see constant orange everywhere. And it seems like a shame for the Dutch fans that they're not going to get to watch, their hero driving at Zandvoort. So a little bit of a shame that that's not happening. I don't know what you make of that, but I mean, we also have the kind of rotational tracks, don't we? And I know that Spa will be one of those tracks that starts to rotate from 2027 onwards. So, this is the last time, I guess, that's going to be on the calendar full time for a little while as well.
It's a time of change, isn't it, in Formula One? We're seeing, as the series continues to increase in its fan base, that more and more venues are wanting to host it and are prepared to offer some significant ka-ching. And as a result, it means that these these old school venues, you look at your Zandvoort, you look at your Spa, you look at your Imola, and obviously they're either being axed from the calendar completely or put on this kind of biannual system where they're only going to take place every other year. And of course, you've also got to take into account how many discussions there are around Monaco, and obviously look into the next few years, what can be done to make the Monaco Grand Prix more exciting? Will we get to a point, when that deal concludes, where F1 feels like, what, Monaco's not exciting enough. Yes, it's got the glitz and the glamour, but we want good racing. So I think it's sad, and I agree with you. I think the only reason the return to Zandvoort happened is because of Max Verstappen. And to be fair, fair play. It's a pretty good reason to return to Zandvoort, if you ask me. And it has given some good races, particularly again when the weather has been a bit spicy. So, and Spa is the big one for me. The last time that it's going to be full time on the calendar, and also before becoming a biannual event, it's disappointing, because for me, that's not what I want to see happen with Formula One. I want Formula One to be having the best calendars in the world for every year. And unfortunately, the best circuits in the world every year. And obviously, unfortunately, the way the times are changing in motorsport, full stop, that's not happening, because it seems to be that these old school venues just don't have the finances to either renovate its facilities up to the current standards that you see in the likes of America and the Middle East, where things are just on another level in terms of hospitality, for example, and we're losing them. So yeah, it's sad, but hopefully something could be sorted for these old school venues going forward, so that we don't lose them entirely. That would be a real shame.
Yeah, I'm going to the Hungaroring in a couple of weeks for GB3. It's the same weekend as the British Grand Prix, but you may have seen photos of the Hungaroring, because that was one of those tracks where I think they were in danger of being, taken off the calendar, because the infrastructure, the infrastructure's all right, but because the facilities there are very outdated. The main grandstand that you see, obviously, when you see pictures of the race start, that was kind of like propped up on wooden pillars and kind of, what do you call those things that you put under a train line?
Under a train line?
The things, I can't even think what the word is.
No.
I'm so confused by
I thought
by
that
calendars.
was a bird. You're asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, I think we're delirious by too many calendars. But sleepers is what I'm thinking
sleepers.
of. Okay. Railway sleepers. Yeah, it's kind of propped up on that. But you might have seen the photos. They've completely taken everything away, completely trashed it, and they've been rebuilding it. I think they've resurfaced the track as well. So I'm really looking forward to going to the Hungaroring to see what that is like ahead of Formula One going there, of course. And that's back on the calendar next year. And it feels like what they've done there is they've gone, okay, we can pay the money, that's fine, but we've got to make the money back, because the fans need to have more opportunity to spend money, because I know that these tracks have a lot of temporary stuff that comes along, but it didn't feel like that was the most commercially smart track that I've ever been to. And we also need to make it look good, because Formula One's becoming more and more glitzy and glamoury, and we see Las Vegas, and we see some of the cool tracks coming on. We've got Madrid coming on as a street track in a really cool European city, so we need to make an effort. So they've really kind of pulled everything out, and actually I think GB3 and the weekend that we have there will be the first look at the new track. So hopefully on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel, I'll do a little behind the scenes of the new look Hungaroring, which is going to be cool. I think also for Zandvoort, one of the things that I would love to know stats, and we'll never get the stats, how much work has Zandvoort and Max Verstappen Racing at Zandvoort done for the consumption of street waffles? Because it feels like most people don't talk about street waffles until the Dutch Grand Prix comes along.
Yeah.
And then we see all the pictures behind the scenes of them getting given out to street waffles. All my friends that have been there, all they talk about for the whole weekend is how many street waffles they ate. And I think that that's going to go away. So I feel like the consumption in the world of street waffles is going to go down from 2027 onwards.
I am, obviously, Racing News 365 is a Dutch company, so I spend quite a lot of time over in the Netherlands. So I can't really comment on that, because I am a regular street waffle consumer. So yeah, that's not really my place to go. Maybe, who knows? Maybe somebody can let us know on that. Out of all things, I'm amazed you've thought of that, by the way.
I think it's the thing I think of the most when I think of the Dutch Grand Prix, because a lot of my friends go over there, and I've got friends who live in Amsterdam, and they always go out to it, and they're always talking about the street waffles and how good they are, because if you've ever been to Amsterdam, you'll know that, a street waffle in a bag is fine, but a street waffle that's been made fresh is a thing of supreme beauty, and cover it in chocolate, or half cover it in chocolate maybe, and it goes to the next level. And I don't know why we're talking about this, because this is a motorsport show, but let's just move on from street waffles. One of the things that we've already kind of discussed, Nick, is that the kind of putting the races together. So we've got Australia and China to start the season. That goes into it themselves. That makes sense. It's, it's a fairly short distance. Then there's a week in between. Then they go to Japan. Very nice for everyone working in Formula One. They can have a nice week in Japan if they want to, like I did recently with Formula E. And then obviously we go to the Middle East. So Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, they're together. The USA and Canada, those two are next to each other, but they're not together. But it makes sense for infrastructure reasons. Obviously, it's not far to go from Miami to Montreal. You can get the stuff there, I guess, in the most sort of, sustainable way. What's annoying, I think, for fans is when that kind of thing happens. Because if you imagine you're a fan in the United Kingdom and you think, oh, look, USA and Canada next to each other. Imagine how cool that would be if it was back to back. Now, I know these things are very hard to work out, but I think we have to remember sometimes when Formula One extends itself to 24 races, when everything is massively commercialized, when, things like, I can't remember which team it was, so let's not shout them out, but one of the team's t-shirts was like $100 or something ridiculous for a t-shirt if you want to go and wear their t-shirt at the racetrack. Fans need to be considered in all of these things here, and the thought of going over to North America and being able to watch a couple of races is pretty cool. Then you have to think about the Formula One staff, because when you're away for 24 weeks a year, that's probably more like 30 weeks a year when you have testing, when you have weeks in between where it doesn't make sense to fly home from and you kind of stay out there, like I just mentioned with Japan. So I think they've done quite well here where we don't have loads of triple headers, because from the people I know who work in Formula One, the triple header is something which really takes it out of you. And then if you've got another week afterwards off, you're still working, really. It's hard to just take time off altogether in a team. The triple headers can really take it out of you. And we kind of end next season with 2 triple headers, which I guess when it comes to the end of the season is either a good thing or a bad thing. It's either a good thing because, you can get through them and then the season's over. It's Christmas. You can have a great time. But also, do you want 2 triple headers to end a season when you've already done nearly 20 races by the time the first triple header starts? What do you reckon?
It is absolutely brutal. You have no triple headers all season until you get to the final 6 rounds where you've then got back-to-back triple headers, which is just, I really feel this is where my heart goes out to all those of you who work in Formula One, who are having to travel to all those races, because yes, there is the glitz and glamour, of course, of traveling across the world. Also, as you know a lot more than me, but at the same time, it's a long way from home, particularly if you're away for what will be essentially, you'd imagine, 7 weeks or 8 weeks of the year. It's a long time, but it's also the fact of where the triple headers are. Of course, we have our normal kind of America's triple header in terms of obviously Austin, Mexico City, and Interlagos. 3 venues which are, well, in terms of Austin, Mexico City, relatively close to each other. Interlagos, of course. Relatively.
I can tell you now, Nick, I once thought, and this was only 2 years ago, that actually what a great triple header to go to as a fan, because obviously you go to Austin, then you go to Mexico. I thought, I might better drive. Do a bit of a road trip. Then I was told, don't drive over the Mexican border and don't drive through parts of Mexico. So, okay, you can fly. It's like, a couple of hours maximum. And then I thought, oh, brilliant. Then you go on to Brazil. That's not far away. Then I looked at a globe. It's like a very considerably long haul flight away, isn't it? I don't know why I think Brazil is just below Mexico.
The thing is, though, that's kind of hidden by the fact that once again, to end the season, you've got the triple header of Las Vegas all the way then to Qatar. And then the short trip to Abu Dhabi. It's that one, isn't it? Going from Vegas to Qatar, which you just, and actually we saw last season, and I believe the year before, a lot of drivers became ill. There was a lot of bugs going through the paddock because actually it was such a grueling journey, because it's probably the longest flight on the calendar in terms of one hit that close. It's a staggering trip when you think about it. And I just don't understand why, when they're grouping races together better, and we've just praised them for what they've done, for example, with putting obviously Miami and Canada together, which obviously makes it a proper European season. When you've then got Vegas, then a long trip to Qatar, then to Abu Dhabi, when actually a couple of weeks before Vegas, you've quite literally got the races in Texas, Mexico City, and Interlagos. Could you maybe, for example, I don't know, could you make Austin and Texas maybe a double header, and then Mexico and Interlagos double header in the future? Again, that probably isn't particularly good for the broadcasters and for F1 to have back-to-back races in America, which I understand, but I just look at that and I just think that's in November after a long season, that's the 22nd round of the year. it's a long way. And I think that's when you start to see the drivers looking a bit fed up, and understandably so, because they're probably, jet lagged and then some.
Who knows? We may already have a champion by then, like we did last time, where Max Verstappen obviously won in Las Vegas.
Possibly.
So I'm sure that long flight to Qatar's not as much of a problem when you've already won the World Championship. Do I think so?
That's a bold claim.
Yeah, probably not. I kind of hope that it goes down to the last race. We enjoyed what happened when it went down to the last race last time in Abu Dhabi, or at least some Dutch people did. So who knows? I think on the whole, they have ironed out that issue of Montreal being a bit of an outlier, so that's good. And what you say there about the only problem now really being USA to Qatar, I think that's not a bad thing. I think on the whole, it's a good calendar, nothing that we didn't really expect. Intrigued to see what happens in Madrid. Obviously, that is subject to FIA circuit homologation, which means that, technically at the moment it needs a sign off to happen. But I'm sure with all the effort they're putting in there and the fact they're taking F2 and F3 there means that will get signed off. So on the whole, a decent calendar. We're going to talk about the Formula E calendar in the final part of this show in just a bit. But first, let's look ahead then to the Canadian Grand Prix, because we've already kind of touched on the fact that we think Lance Stroll is going to be there. We saw signs last time out that Fernando Alonso was back to his best, but unfortunately he's not really got the machinery underneath him to pull out results. Do you think he can do anything this weekend in Canada? Because it'd be nice to see that Aston Martin doing good things again. I know their main focus is on next year.
No, I think to put it simply, I think this weekend, Canada's a really interesting one, because obviously last season, George Russell and Max Verstappen set identical lap times. So Mercedes, they could be competitive this weekend. Ferrari, you never quite know until the weekend starts. Red Bull, particularly Max, he's going to be there or thereabouts, but of course has the additional pressure knowing that he cannot put a foot out of line. He cannot receive just one race point, one additional point on the super license, because then he gets the race ban. With Aston Martin, I think it's unlikely. I think points, absolutely. A Q3 appearance, most definitely. If he could fight for maybe the top 8, top 7, depending on if one of the big 4 teams has a difficult weekend, it's possible. But of course, the bigger factor which could support Fernando is the weather. We've seen over the years that Canada can throw up some exciting races based on what the sky does, and rain is pretty common, it's fair to say, when the Canadian Grand Prix comes around. Looks like potentially maybe a wet race on Sunday based on current forecasts. So if the weather is wet, Fernando has a great chance. If it's dry, I think the aim for him will simply be best of the midfield, and if he can do that, then that's a good step, because obviously, it's, as you point out yourself, it's not been the best start to the season for him. But I think for him, though, his eyes are on 2026, and just hoping that Adrian Newey, the wizard that the man is, can conjure up something spectacular which could maybe get him that much wanted third world title.
Let's get on to the big question, and that is, who is going to be more worried about this license point fiasco with Max Verstappen? Will it be him, or will it be Red Bull? Because we know he's 1 point away from getting an automatic race ban. We saw Kevin Magnussen get a race ban last season, and he's got 2 races before some of those points drop off, meaning he's a little bit out of the woods. Who's going to be more worried, the driver or the team?
I think Red Bull. I honestly think this puts Red Bull under more pressure, and for a simple reason is that they depend so much on Max to score quite literally pretty much all their points. Max is their shining star. He's the person that makes Red Bull click at the moment, and has done for the last few years. If Max were to get, and what's really important here is that, yes, Max has got to get through the next 2 races without picking up 1 penalty point before he loses some points from his super license. What's crucial to note is that, yes, okay, if he does nothing wrong these next 2 races in Canada and Austria, he'll drop down to 9 points in the super license. He's then got to go all the way until October without picking up 3 points, because that's how long he's got to wait before he loses further points in his license, because most of his points were picked up towards the end of last season, thinking back, of course, to Mexico City, in particular, and what happened there with Lando Norris. So I do think that Max will... Is Max, for example, going to take things easy? No. And as, again, chatting to Sebastian Buemi when discussing Max, and he points out that Max never gives up. He's a fighter. He does not want to lose. And if he's there fighting for no matter what position, if it's first or 19th, if he's got a chance to go for it, he's going to. And I don't think in the back of his mind, there's going to be the point of, oh no, if I do this and it goes wrong, there could be a race ban coming up. I just don't think he thinks like that, which is what makes him exciting to watch, because he could quite easily now, for the next 2 races, just cruise around, do nothing wrong, happy days, he's lost some points. That's not Max, because at the end of the day, if he does that, he's then well out this title fight, because ultimately the McLarens will just score too many points in the next 2 races. He's got to take the fight to them. And the only way to take the fight to them is for Max to do what Max does best, which is drive his car to the absolute ragged edge and just get the absolute maximum out of his package and out of his driving style.
The New Zealand Herald are reporting that if Max is to get a ban, that Liam Lawson would be in the frame to go back to Red Bull.
Correct.
To potentially sub for him for 1 race. Obviously, New Zealand Herald is in New Zealand. Liam Lawson is from New Zealand. Does Liam Lawson need that after what he's been through, after getting replaced after 2 races, to then get potentially, and this is all obviously theoretical, the likelihood is Max Verstappen probably won't get any more points and we won't have this situation, but does he need that after all he's been through this year?
So Racing News 365 understands that it would be one of the Racing Bulls V-Club drivers who would replace Max for the 1 race should he get a ban, and that'll then be Ayumu Iwasa, who then takes the seat at Racing Bulls for the 1 race. But with Liam, it's a hard one, because actually I think depending on which way you look at it, for Liam it's going back to the team he lasted 2 races at, and of course it just went horribly for him. But on the flip side, is it any better for Isaac Hadjar, who since obviously what happened in Australia has just been this absolute star? And I don't think many people expected Isaac to be as good as he has been. He looks like he could be the real deal for Red Bull in the future, to partner Max and be almost the curse breaker to the second Red Bull seat. Would Red Bull want to put Isaac in there and maybe, applying too much pressure perhaps in his rookie season, when they've learnt from Liam that putting a driver with little F1 experience into that seat, it can be overwhelming, as we saw in the past with obviously Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon in particular as well. I wonder if they would do Liam, purely for the fact that he's driven the car, which might sound ridiculous even though Isaac is outperforming him this season, but for the sake of 1 race, would you rather have Isaac in the car, had to get him up to speed in the RB21 just to then send him back to Racing Bulls, or would you go for Liam, who, yes, whilst he didn't perform well, does at least know how to drive the car, as silly as that sounds? So for me, actually, yeah, if it were to happen, my money would be on Liam, and I think that's actually quite a safe bet.
Yeah, nothing to lose as well for Liam Lawson.
Nothing to lose.
Protect your actual upcoming star assets in Isaac Hadjar, and give an opportunity to someone else from the Red Bull family. You make a lot of sense there, Nick. So obviously Oscar Piastri goes into this weekend with a 10-point lead over his teammate Lando Norris. They're on 186 and 176 points respectively. And then Max Verstappen down a few points behind, 137, but never count out Max Verstappen. We will do live race updates on Sunday from the Canadian Grand Prix, and we'll have more guests across the talkSPORT network this week, including later on today, if you're listening to this as soon as it comes out. And of course, you can go back and watch this and listen back if you have missed it. Jenson Button, 2009 F1 World Champion, will be live with Andy Goldstein and Darren Bent on talkSPORT Drive. What a meeting of minds that will be. Of course, he's speaking ahead of competing at Le Mans for, I think, maybe the 3rd time, maybe the 4th time. Who knows? I know he did the NASCAR one first time round, didn't finish that. I think he came 39th the second time. Then he came 9th last time. So if you look at Jenson Button's record at Le Mans, he gets better each time. So surely he'll be winning it this weekend.